Every Wednesday, William Henry's Revelations bring you a powerful half hour of information at the cutting edge of reality. Information that you cannot find anywhere else in the world. And now, here's William.
Welcome, everyone. An update. As I reported in my presentation, The Light of Sion, and my companion book, The Secret of Sion, ancient prophecy predicted that during these times a burst of light would emanate from the Milky Way center called Sion by the ancients, anointing us with a hidden power and raising our soul's vibration. On January 2nd, 2013, researchers announced the detection of a mysterious monster fountain of charged particles, as they called it, emanating from the center of our galaxy, stretching more than halfway across the sky. The researchers were able to map the towers of star power or star stuff. These newfound outflows of particles from the galactic center were discovered by a team of astronomers from Australia, the United States, Italy, and the Netherlands. These correspond to the purple Fermi bubbles found in 2010. You might remember those massive columns of gamma rays that were emanating from the galactic center. Researchers say that these pillars of star power contain an extraordinary amount of energy, about the same as the amount of energy liberated by 1 million or so supernova explosions, but stress that they pose no harm to us. They're going in the opposite direction from Earth, in fact, and they spew vertically like towers of star power on the galactic plane, and they affect the galaxy's magnetic field. We are surfing the tides of this energy and being anointed by the hidden power of these charged particles or drops of Sion in the galaxy's magnetic field. As I proposed in my Sion book and presentation, and following the ancient law, as above, so below, these pillars of light or star power are the galactic version of the pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night the Israelites followed in the wilderness. This pillar of star power emanates from the galactic center, which could well be the throne of Christ or the heavenly Sion, where the heavenly Ark of the Covenant is kept. This tower is certainly symbolically equivalent to the tree of knowledge that links heaven and earth, and the charged particles, the fruit of this tree, are mystically referred to as blue apples in the tradition of the Templars of southern France. The Milky Way is rising, and it's time to feel the anointing and embrace the hidden power of the light of Sion. In the early 12th century, an amazing group of spiritual seekers sought the light of Sion, the Knights Templar. And today's guest, Freddie Silva, has uncovered a previously unknown chapter in Templar history, especially regarding Sion, that places the initiate knights in a previously unknown time and place. He reveals how the Templars, in collusion with Cistercian monks and a mysterious group residing in an abbey on Mount Sion, carried out their greatest and least known enterprise, the creation of Europe's first nation-state. Freddie Silva is a lifelong student of Earth mystery, sacred space, and ancient system of knowledge. He's a frequent Dreamland and Revelations guest, and we're very pleased to welcome him to Revelations today. Welcome, Freddie.
Good morning, or good afternoon.
Well, what a fascinating book. First Templar Nation, their greatest accomplishment is the one never told. Tell us about it, Freddie.
Well, I don't know if many of the people listening know my life story, but my actual accent betrays my nationality. I'm actually Portuguese by birth. I also have an American citizenship, which makes me very confused. But about 15 years ago, I really just sat down and wanted to find out why there's such a rich tradition of Templars in my country of birth, which is Portugal. And I thought this would be an interesting little story to tell, because not many people know about it. And I was looking just through the basic historical versions of the story, how the King of Portugal was associated with the Templars, and they basically carved their little territory out from the yoke of Galicia and the rest of the Spanish territories. You know, and back then, Spain didn't exist, France didn't exist, none of these places existed. And I thought it was a bit curious that Portugal eventually became the first independent nation-state of Europe. And I thought, well, that's quite a proud thing to do. But then I was looking at the one of the original charters for one of the cities that was granted by the first king of Portugal. And I looked at the seal, and it's a sort of a symbolic version of the Templar logo, in which the name Portugal is actually cut in a certain way that reveals the name Portugal. And I thought, that's an interesting little slip there. And I've worked as a symbologist for quite a while to understand that, people tend to sort of give away secrets very quietly using symbols. It's a wonderful method of encoding information to people who know while keeping the people who don't know at bay. And I wondered, is it possible that the reason why the Templars were over in this part of Europe 2,000 miles away from where they should have been, in Jerusalem, had something to do with the Grail? And I left it there for quite some time. And then I got involved with a couple of other books, a couple of other projects. I got to start understanding more about sacred space, how temples work. And it's that understanding that suddenly got me back to the Templars, because the more I began to look at the places that the Templars were residing in, whether they were in France, in the Holy Land, or even in Portugal, they all were built on top of ancient sacred sites. And knowing that these places are usually hotspots of geomagnetic energy, I wondered if there was a bigger story. So I began to look at some old manuscripts written by the Cistercian monks. Now, these people were copious scribblers. They wrote everything down. And going back to the 12th century, I began to uncover information that has never been revealed before, mostly because it was written in Portuguese, which, of course, I can read. And I tracked these very rare books, and they're huge things, William. I mean, they're the kind of books that you turn over. They're written on vellum, which is animal skin. And when you turn these things over, they make a very large noise in libraries. So everybody turns around.
I saw the Voynich manuscript one time at the Yale Library in New Haven. It was also written on that similar material. It's wild to hold that.
Yeah, because you're touching the actual corners of the book that the monks last touched about 400 years ago.
In this case, it was John Dee with the Voynich manuscript. But go on.
Exactly. And I began to look at these, read these things, because I managed to get access to a copy of this book, which it turns out is not the copy of the original book that the Cistercians wrote, but it's an actual copy of an actual version of the book. And I was wondering how this ended up in Harvard, of all places. Now, we have a big Portuguese community around here, but I never realized that this book ever migrated out of Portugal. So I was sitting in this library, and every few minutes I would be bursting out with an expletive, because suddenly I would be reading things that no historian has ever come across. And there were connections here that were actually sounded by Bernard of Clairvaux, who was the leader of the Cistercian order, that talked about his nephew, the first king of Portugal. And, of course, Bernard himself was claimed to have been one of the Merovingian line, part of the Merovingian dynasty, part of a holy bloodline. Mm-hmm. And suddenly the whole concept that the Templars went all the way to Portugal to create a nation-state wasn't just by accident, it was deliberate. Because when they were saying that the Templars in Portugal demanded a third of the territory from the Portuguese king, it turns out that the king gave the land quite openly, but also that this land should be free from all ecclesiastical and otherwise interference. So why was this particular piece of land so important to the Templars? I mean, they could have gone back to France, they could have gone to Scotland, which they did, and Britain, and yet everybody's been looking at the Templars over in the East, and no one's focused on the Templars in Portugal, which is where the whole story then evolved, and it turned out to be this huge story, which links in, of course, the Templars, the Order of Sion, which you just basically touched upon, William, and also the Cistercian Order. And once you start looking at the origins of these people and these connections, there's a very intricate web of people and a very deliberate attempt to hide something of enormous import in this country.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the Templars hold immense fascination. And at first glance, people might think, well, okay, we've heard about all the Templars. Dan Brown's cracked all that. It's utterly fascinating, but they're not relevant today. But actually, what the Templars were about then is very much part of our present reality and may even hold the key to current events in Jerusalem and elsewhere.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the popes, I think it was Pope Pius IX, back in the 19th century, he let the cat out of the bag because it was rumored for a long, long time. And it was known by most of the Gnostic sects in the Middle East at the time that the Templars were following two doctrines. One was secret, and the other one was very public, because back then the Catholic Church was in its ascendance. And obviously you couldn't fight the Church. They had so many people in their back pocket, and fighting them would be ridiculous. So Pope Pius basically revealed, and this is a written quote, he claims that the Templars were following a Johannite heresy. that they basically had one open source of devotion, which was to the Catholic Church, which was basically they just paid lip service to the church. And behind all of this, all of their initiates into the order, and there was a secret order behind the Brotherhood, they basically were initiated and followed the Gnostic Gospel of John, which, of course, the Mandeans also followed, and, of course, the Mandeans...
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist. And, of course, this is where the whole story really comes in as to why the Templars were, or part of the reason why they're ultimately taken down by the Church. Because if you follow the line and the understanding of John the Baptist and his connection to a holy bloodline, and also to his connection with Mary Magdalene, and the ministry of Jesus as being the second Messiah, of which John the Baptist, of course, was the priestly Messiah. He had all the power. Now you begin to realize that they were following a truer version of Christianity, which, of course, talks about spiritual enlightenment, self-development, total self-empowerment. And, of course, that was the total anathema to the Church, and it's the one thing that we're all basically striving for in this very day right now.
Right, and it takes us again back to Jerusalem, because cooperation between Jews, Christians, and Muslims is vital to our survival. I mean, you have national security people talking about the risk of a nuclear exchange between Israel and Iran if they were ever to get a nuclear weapon. And it just seems that the secrets of Sion are known and considered sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. The stone of Sion in Jerusalem, as you point out, is also sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. And it seems that the Templars knew this, and this is why it's vital for us to follow this trail right now to learn what it was that they knew.
Well, this is interesting because, as you point out, the Arabs also put a big importance on the stone of Sion. They call it Sayun. It literally means the precious cornerstone of the temple. And then you have to understand in its symbolical meaning, what is the precious cornerstone of the temple? And that can be open to interpretation. Is it a bloodline? Is it a piece of knowledge? Is it an individual? It could be all three. And so if you start looking back at the origins of the Templars in Jerusalem and how they eventually got there, this is not to confuse them with the Crusaders, which are a completely different bunch of people. This is where we all get tripped up. In fact, it took me 6 months just to work out the Templars from the Crusaders, from the Hospitallers, from the Order of the Holy Sepulchre. It's a huge minefield. But when you start looking at the person who was instrumental in starting the ball rolling, which is, of course, Godfrey of Bouillon, who was the first patriarch of Jerusalem, he rides there on the back of the Crusades. Hugh de Paillon shows up 4 years later in Jerusalem, the head of the Templars. And the first thing that Godfrey does after liberating Jerusalem, he walks over to Mount Sion, looks over this dilapidated basilica of Sion that's been sitting there for centuries. And the first thing he does, rather than rebuild Jerusalem, is he starts fixing up the basilica, and he installs 12 monks. Now, that's the source of the whole thing, because these 12 monks that were put there were not by accident. Godfrey de Bouillon and these people had met before. So you trace back his history, 30 years, and you find that when he was living in Orval, which is today's Belgium, a group of monks from Calabria in southern Italy, calling themselves the Order of Sion, moved them to the territory that was owned by his aunt. And they basically built a church there, and one of the people that was pivotal to the monks was a guy called Peter the Hermit. And Peter the Hermit basically became a mentor to a very young Godfrey de Bouillon. So it's funny that when Godfrey liberates Jerusalem and starts rebuilding the basilica on Mount Sion, he installs these very same monks back into that basilica, and they claim that their lineage, that they were protecting the holy bloodline, and also was set up to promote a cross-fertilizing point between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, so that all could attend a certain ritual. They basically draw their traces all the way back to John the Baptist, and they basically said that they were, in a way, they were coming home. But here's the trick. If you fast forward now 15 years later, after Godfrey de Bouillon puts these Order of Sion monks in the Basilica or Mount Sion, you have a guy who basically came over to Jerusalem at the same time as Godfrey. He was accompanied by the first count of a tiny little principality in the west of Europe called Portugal, which is today's Portugal. And he eventually becomes the prior of the Order of Sion. And there are two extracts which I have found in libraries, which are original documents, which show quite clearly that this prior, called Arnaldo, was not only Portuguese, he was also from the county of Burgundy, where so many of the Templars came from. And he and Hugh de Paillon are writing in the same document twice over successive years, claiming that they are their two orders, the Order of Sion and the Templars, have good relationship between them. And that's where the story kicks off, how they end up in Portugal.
Fascinating. Freddie, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of these Templar secrets in a little more detail. Raising the dead? And did the Templars really believe they could build a new Jerusalem? And was that Basilica of Sion a hotspot, like some ancient Wi-Fi hotspot or something? We'll ask Freddie when we come back from the break. This is Revelations. Be right back.
This is Whitley Strieber. The tour that William Henry and Nancy Safford are leading to Rennes-le-Château in May promises to be potentially the experience of a lifetime. It is an area of extraordinary power, and both Nancy and William have been there many times. Not only that, Henry Lincoln will be participating, one of the authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and one of the most knowledgeable people on earth about that powerful and extraordinary area. Don't miss this tour. Go to nancysafford.net or williamhenry.net and get your space reserved right now. How I wish I could go.
Solar storms are becoming the greatest danger that we face, and hardly anybody realizes it. In this riveting new electronic book, Solar Flares, Whitley Strieber tells us that the sun hasn't changed, but we have, and our electric grids have become larger and more sensitive. Find out just where the danger lies and what we can do about it. For once, a major problem has a straightforward solution. But Congress needs to pass a bill, and you need to make that happen. Solar Flares, available for your Kindle, Nook, and iPad for just $3.99. Act today. Let's get Congress moving before the sun shuts us down.
This is Revelations. We're continuing with Freddie Silva. Freddie's new book is First Templar Nation. Their greatest accomplishment is the one never told, how the Knights Templar created Europe's first nation-state. Freddie, the book is more, at first glance, it looks like it's about politics and the creation of this nation-state, but when you get into it, it's a wonderful history of the Templars. You peel the veil back on the Templars and look at them as mystic initiates looking for very specific knowledge that you connect back, fascinatingly, with the Essenes. Let's talk about that connection with the Templar.
Yeah, it is a peeling of onions. And again, when I was writing this, researching, I had no idea where I was going. I had not even any intention of writing beyond how they were ever involved in the creation of Portugal to begin with. But again, the more access I had to manuscripts, which were not translated from Portuguese, and also some in French and German.
These are beyond obscure manuscripts. These are unknown manuscripts, aren't they?
Totally. I mean, you'd have to know where these things are in the first place. And again, as you know, by magic, when you start asking the right questions, William, these things find you.
Right. Yeah,
and
so well done.
By going around these old monasteries in Portugal did I suddenly come across them as if they're sitting there waiting for me to show up. It's a very magical experience.
And what a bummer, Freddie, to have to traipse around Portugal. It's only stunningly beautiful and just one of the most magical places you can conceive of.
And that's just the cafes. Well, hopefully I'll get a tour going towards the end of the year. It'll be quite fun. So, yeah, I began to look at the connection as to what the Templars were looking for, because in the 1800s there was a British contingency of engineers who dug their way under Temple Mount, and I was reading through their original records, which makes fascinating reading, by the way. It's also a 600-page volume. And they were showing the original shafts, and they found that in some of the shafts that went under Temple Mount, they located Templar artifacts. And once you started connecting these stories of what the British found with what the Essenes had buried under Temple Mount, and of course I'm talking about the scrolls that were found in Qumran and also at Nag Hammadi.
The Dead Sea Scrolls, right.
The Dead Sea Scrolls. and they talk about gold and silver bullion that was deposited there. They also talked about an indeterminable treasure that was left there.
Yeah.
When you start looking at the practices of the Templars in terms of their inner mysteries, what they were promoting, the adaptation to John the Baptist, and their adherence to esoteric principles, and the fact that they wore white habits, that the people who wanted to be initiates had to take a year before they were allowed into the inner brotherhood. We're talking about the Ascends here. It's not just the Templars. They basically are a mirror of the Ascends, who are a mirror of the Mandeans, who are a mirror of the people who follow John the Baptist. So they're one and the same sect. So once you've got that figured out, and this is all historical fact, it's just a matter of extension to basically figure out what they bring out from there. Because in 1121, one of the Templars made a very mysterious journey out of Jerusalem, and then he went over back to Belgium, or what was Belgium back then. There was a monk and a scribe who was called Lambert de Saint-Omer, who was basically a human encyclopedia, and he is claimed that he actually unsold one of these scripts that was brought back from under Temple Mount and discovered by the Templars. And one of the diagrams that he made from this script still exists in Ghent University in Belgium. So, and he attributed the source of this diagram to John the Baptist. So now we have several links going on here. We can prove that someone decrypted the scripts that the Templars found, and we know that they were digging for something very important under Temple Mount. They knew where they were going. Their benefactor, who was Bernard of Clairvaux, the head of the Cistercians, also belonged to a Kabbalistic school near Troyes in France. And he, too, was the one who was basically the guy who created the Knights Templar to begin with. Most of the monks and the knights were under his guard, so he instructed them as to where to go, what to look for, because when they brought back all the scrolls from Palestine, and they stopped digging around 1125, this is the moment when they were given special protection by Hugh de Champagne, who was the Count of Champagne region, where all the knights came from. And they were guarded, the things that they brought back from the Holy Land, they were given special protection from all ecclesiastical interference, and I quote that. So something was very, very important. And at this very moment, Hugh de Paillon, and I have this from a 16th century source, Hugh de Paillon, at that moment, sent 4 knights with special powers to establish a Portuguese crown. So while all the Templars are going over to France with something that they dug that was put there by the Ascends, they also sent a second envoy to the west of Europe to start creating this unique nation state where they would basically be able to practice all the things that the Ascends were writing about in their texts, which of course is, and predominantly is, the raising of the dead.
And the raising of the dead and the transformation of a human into an angel.
Exactly. And it has nothing to do with the crucifixion. It has nothing to do with the biblical interpretation. And in fact, if you read the original Gospel of Philip, the Gnostic Gospel of Philip, he quotes, and I love this, any person who believes in the crucifixion and the resurrection as literal events is a fool. End of quote. So they knew, all of these sects knew that the crucifixion, the raising of the dead, was a total mystical experience. It was something to be undertaken while still in the body. And that's where the church differentiates. Because in order to have resurrection of the soul, you have to be out of the body, you have to be dead. And you have to go through the church to experience that, or through the understanding of Jesus. Well, they didn't believe that. They understood that the whole concept of resurrection, raising the dead, was all to do with a mystical experience that was done as a result of immersion, both in Gnostic teachings and also in a ceremony that required going to secret chambers under the ground, lying in sarcophagi, and then rising at the crack of dawn to see the rising of Venus just as the sun is rising, which, of course, is a very ancient Egyptian principle, which they also called the raising of the dead. And the difference between the two is this. The people who were outside of these sects, such as the Ascends and the Templars and the Mandeans, they were basically considered that the soul that was inhabiting the human body is extricated from its source. Therefore, if you don't understand how your soul is and how you are supposed to live, you are the walking dead. You are totally unaware. But
we're the dead, in other words, right.
Exactly. So once you've understood and you've imbibed of the knowledge, and you've gone through this ritual of resurrecting yourself from a ritual grave, you become risen from the dead. So it was never meant to be taken literally. It was also metaphorical.
Right. Humans were called animals, and men was the term they used for angels. And it's the angels and the perfected humans that inhabit the New Jerusalem. So let's talk about, what did the Templars believe concerning the New Jerusalem, Freddie?
Basically, there were the people who took on the mantle of the people who were basically persecuted by the Romans. Of course, the Essenes went underground when the Romans showed up in Jerusalem. John the Baptist was decapitated. He was the person that basically was taking forward the concept of the early Christian idea into the public realm. And this is the same idea that the Essenes were sharing, the same idea that the Mandeans, the Sabians, Zoroastrians, all of those people share the same idea. And it was all to do with the resuscitation of the soul so that you would walk your life totally, purposefully awake, and you'd be able to have a total sense of self-empowerment while still in the body. That's the nuts and bolts of it. So these people would be persecuted from time to time because obviously the Romans wanted to control the people, and then along came the Catholic Church. They wanted to control everybody else, and they denied this complete understanding. So the Templars were the people who then took over that understanding, and they promulgated this all throughout Europe. Because if you think about it, these were rich people who gave away all of their worldly goods to become totally poor. They spent years digging in horrible conditions under Temple Mount with picks and shovels to find something of extraordinary consequence that when they came back to Europe, everybody and their right brother wanted to give all of their money to the Templars and wanted to associate yourselves with them. So
okay, so we're just quickly, Freddie, we're at the Temple Mount. I know people in Tel Aviv and Tehran and Langley, Virginia are listening because they want to know what's going on at the Temple Mount, because they know in 2013, 2014, 2015, that dot of real estate is the single most powerful dot of real estate on planet Earth. So what did the Templars find there?
Oh, it's if you read the available information that survives, it's quite clear that they obviously found gold, because there was plenty of gold bullion that was left there by the Essenes as the Roman army is encroaching on Jerusalem. But their biggest treasure really relates back to the scrolls that they had learned from the Mandeans. Now, Mandean means secret knowledge, and the Mandeans also held some very important books. The Mandeans, for those who don't know, are another sect, a Gnostic sect, who lived just before the time of Jesus. And basically the Mandeans and the Essenes are totally interchangeable. So the Mandeans, who were also persecuted, they also gave their information to the Essenes. And one of the central pieces of their information was something called the Ginza. Literally means a treasure. And what this treasure is a book by John the Baptist. And so they were protecting this very old esoteric right of information that shows quite clearly that Jesus was not the Son of God, that the actual lineage was via John the Baptist. And it was by decapitating John the Baptist, you essentially killed off the esoteric Christian movement. And then, of course, the radical movement, the Catholic Church, moves in. So I think that's what the trouble really is essentially all about, on one level. On another level, if we look at sacred sites in general, and knowing now what we know scientifically, places like Temple Mount, just like any other sacred sites in the world, are hotspots of geomagnetic activity. They literally are places where the conduit lines of energy of the Earth flow through, where they intersect, and this is where the world's major temples basically are built. So if you're able to control these hotspots in a certain way by doing certain rituals, you can actually influence what goes on the face of the Earth.
Well, and I wonder, Freddie, if like the Basilica of Sion was like a Wi-Fi hotspot, an ancient Wi-Fi hotspot, where you get on that location and you can download the Terma treasure, the sacred knowledge.
Oh, in a matter of speaking, absolutely. It's if you put yourself in a state of awareness where you become a receptacle open to that information, it becomes a shamanic experience where you ask the right questions on the right location. You download information. The Egyptians were masters of this stuff. They built all of their temples exactly these same hotspots. And if you know how to do the ritual, you can actually download this information. And, of course, knowledge is everything. You control the information. You control people around the world. So I think there is some truth to that. These places are not just repositories of physical treasure and scrolls, which in themselves are treasure. They're treasure of words.
Right.
But also the sites themselves are energetically powerful as to whoever controls them, of course, controls the entire country. I mean, here in America, we have, of course, Washington, D.C. If you look at the original blueprint and where all the buildings are, and I put this in my last book, The Divine Blueprint, it shows that all the major sites that the Freemasons built in Washington, including the White House and the Dome of the Capitol, are exactly where they are for a very strategic reason, and they are all built on Egyptian principles of manipulation.
Well, and speaking of other hot spots as well, I was very intrigued by your discussion about the Osirian Triangle. Tell us about that.
Oh, now that was very interesting because it was actually a side project. And you know how it works, William. You get so involved in your work, and suddenly you take on this transcendental sort of thought that sometimes you're out of your body when you're writing, and something comes through to you that presents itself as a picture, and you have no idea what's going on, and you follow the information, and you're led to this revelation, and that's pretty much what happened. I was doing, in fact, I believe I was with you in Egypt when I sort of had this revelation. We were at the Osirian at Abydos, which is this sort of underground temple, or it is now. Back then it wasn't an underground temple. It's the fact that the Nile mud is silted up around it. But it's this colossal temple where it was used as a sort of a birthing house, about 10, 20. In this place, this is where the origin of the concept of raising the dead used to be experienced in Egypt. It was a place where people used to be put underground in the chamber overnight, and then they would experience this rising to experience the rising star at dawn. So I began to look at the sites in Egypt and also the sites in Jerusalem that the Templars were very keen on. One is the Mount Sion. The second one, of course, was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the whole reason why they went there in the first place. And 3 is the one place that they were very adamant that they wanted to live in, and that was Solomon's Stables. Now, when I was doing my research for my original book, The Divine Blueprint, I became fascinated by the way that sacred sites are aligned in perfect triangles. It's a whole other story. But these 3 sites in Jerusalem are also in a perfect triangle, and I mean perfect. There is no deviation at all. So when you bisect that triangle, you end up literally in the Osirian in Egypt. It is almost the Templars are actually showing you, look, even though we're several thousand years now ahead in time, we are still following the same Egyptian principles of raising the dead, physically and metaphorically speaking. And it was a huge revelation. I had no idea it even existed, but there it is. The proof is right there.
Incredible. I mean, there's evidence the Templar were at Philae, but you'd never hear of it at the Osirian. That's profound.
Yeah, and in fact, it's the connection between the two is Freemasonry, which of course is an extension of the Templars, and they have in their 3rd degree an actual ritual where the candidate is risen from the dead. He goes down into a secret chamber. He recites certain words, and then his blindfold is revealed, symbolizing that he can now see. He is now obviously aware. Right. And the same thing was part of the Egyptian concept of leaving the initiate down in this chamber overnight to have this personal mystical experience of God, and he would be awakened at dawn. He was brought out of this chamber to meet Venus or Isis. Same thing happened with the Templars as well. Wherever they went, in London, the preceptory in Paris, of course, the main place in Portugal, at Tomara, which is the center of their whole activity, they had the same secret chambers as well. And in one case, where my grandfather was born, in this hill called Monsanto, which has nothing to do with the chemical company in Portugal.
The Holy Mountain.
Exactly, the Holy Mount. There are these anthropomorphic graves cut out of the stone with Templar symbols, which are too shallow to hide a body. Therefore, I believe they were actually used for ritual resurrection as well, because they're all placed on the eastern side of the mountain, which, of course, is the side that faces the rising light of the sun. So even in Portugal, they were also practicing this ritual of raising themselves from the dead.
The Templar protected a secret for which they would rather die than reveal it, and Freddie Silva takes you into that secret in the deepest way I've seen in a long time. And congratulations on this wonderful, wonderful book, Freddie. I wish you the best of luck with it, and keep us posted as you start to organize a tour to the Port of the Grail. Would love to join it.
Oh, absolutely. I think there'll be about 6 or 7 people. I like to keep them nice and short, but if you're into good coffee and good cakes and lots of climbing up hills, you're in.
Well, Claire and I will be in Spain this summer, so maybe we'll get a chance to zip down there and just take a peek ourselves.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah. So, Freddie, thank you so much for joining us today. Best of luck with the book. Please keep us posted on new developments and things you're working on. You going to be seeing any crop circles this year, by the way?
To be honest, I haven't seen a genuine major crop circle since 2003. I think the information has been given. It's been shared. I think we're just now seeing very small, sporadic, simple circles here and there, mostly in America, oddly enough. Because we've now been given the information. So I've kind of left the crop circle world to its own devices now. There's a lot of faking going on, and I don't want to be part of that.
I'm with you.
I've just maintained the information that I wrote in my first book because it's still current. Nothing's actually been added ever since, and that was 10 years ago. Quite amazing.
So, best way to get the book, The First Templar Nation, Freddie, is through your website or Amazon? What's the best way?
Oh, First Templar Nation goes through my website, invisibletemple.com. Otherwise,
okay.
Amazon gets a percentage.
Great. Well, thank you once again for joining us today, Freddie. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Likewise. Thanks, William. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. This has been Revelations. Thank you for listening. See you next time.
Attending a William Henry presentation is unforgettable. Keep up with his schedule at williamhenry.net. You've been listening to William Henry's Revelations on Dreamland Radio. Next Wednesday, another cutting-edge revelation from William Henry.
Many people know about it, and I was looking just through the basic historical versions of the story, how the King of Portugal was associated with the Templars, and they basically carved their little territory out from the yoke of Galicia and the rest of the Spanish territories. You know, and back then, Spain didn't exist, France didn't exist, none of these places existed. And I thought it was a bit curious that Portugal eventually became the first independent nation-state of Europe. And I thought, well, that's quite a proud thing to do. But then I was looking at the one of the original charters for one of the cities that was granted by the first king of Portugal. And I looked at the seal, and it's a sort of a symbolic version of the Templar logo in which the name Portugal is actually cut in a certain way that reveals the name Portugal. And I thought, that's an interesting little slip there. And I've worked as a symbologist for quite a while to understand that, people
of astronomers from Australia, the United States, Italy, and the Netherlands. These correspond to the purple Fermi bubbles found in 2010. You might remember those massive columns of gamma rays that were emanating from the galactic center. Researchers say that these pillars of star power contain an extraordinary amount of energy, about the same as the amount of energy liberated by 1 million or so supernova explosions, but stress that they pose no harm to us. They're going in the opposite direction from Earth, in fact, and they spew vertically like towers of star power on the galactic plane, and they affect the galaxy's magnetic field. We are surfing the tides of this energy and being anointed by the hidden power of these charged particles, or drops of Sion, in the galaxy's magnetic field. As I proposed in my Sion book and presentation, and following the ancient law, as above, so below, these pillars of light or star power are the galactic version of the pillar of cloud by day. And
every Wednesday, William Henry's Revelations bring you a powerful half hour of information at the cutting edge of reality. Information that you cannot find anywhere else in the world. And now, here's William.
Welcome, everyone. An update. As I reported in my presentation, The Light of Sion, and my companion book, The Secret of Sion, ancient prophecy predicted that during these times a burst of light would emanate from the Milky Way center called Sion by the ancients, anointing us with a hidden power and raising our soul's vibration. On January 2nd, 2013, researchers announced the detection of a mysterious monster fountain of charged particles, as they called it, emanating from the center of our galaxy, stretching more than halfway across the sky. The researchers were able to map the towers of star power or star stuff. These newfound outflows of particles from the galactic center were discovered by a team of pillar of fire by night the Israelites followed in the wilderness. This pillar of star power emanates from the galactic center, which could well be the throne of Christ or the heavenly Sion, where the heavenly Ark of the Covenant is kept. This tower is certainly symbolically equivalent to the tree of knowledge that links heaven and earth, and the charged particles, the fruit of this tree, are mystically referred to as blue apples in the tradition of the Templars of southern France. The Milky Way is rising, and it's time to feel the anointing and embrace the hidden power of the light of Sion. In the early 12th century, an amazing group of spiritual seekers sought the light of Sion, the Knights Templar. And today's guest, Freddie Silva, has uncovered a previously unknown chapter in Templar history, especially regarding Sion, that places the initiate knights in a previously unknown time and place. He reveals how the Templars, in collusion with Cistercian monks and a mysterious group residing in an abbey on Mount Sion, carried out their greatest and least known enterprise, the creation of Europe's first nation-state. Freddie Silva is a lifelong student of Earth mystery, sacred space, and ancient system of knowledge. He's a frequent Dreamland and Revelations guest, and we're very pleased to welcome him to Revelations today. Welcome, Freddie.
Good morning, or good afternoon.
Well, what a fascinating book. First Templar Nation, their greatest accomplishment is the one never told. Tell us about it, Freddie.
Well, I don't know if many of the people listening know my life story, but my actual accent betrays my nationality. I'm actually Portuguese by birth. I also have an American citizenship, which makes me very confused. But about 15 years ago, I really just sat down and wanted to find out why there's such a rich tradition of Templars in my country of birth, which is Portugal. And I thought this would be an interesting little story to tell, because not